Everyone. Welcome to the second day of programs for the Vancouver Art Book Fair. If you're just tuning in, my name is Vivian Sming, pronouns she, her, they, them, and I publish artist books through my publishing studio, Sming Books, and am the guest curator for this year's virtual program. The Vancouver Art Book Fair is committed to the advancement, appreciation, and circulation of artist publishing. And the fair and all of its programs are free and open to the public. So please consider joining the membership program, which does help pay artists and keep these events free and accessible. We'll be sharing that link in the chat to sign up. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the Vancouver Art Book Fair does take place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm streaming here from my home in the Bay Area on the land stewarded by the Mwekma Ohlone people. And as we're here to talk about books and publishing, I also want to acknowledge the many histories and languages that have been erased through the prioritization of paper as being the source of history, legitimacy, and value. So these 2 days of programs are a way for us to understand how publishing can really be a site of resistance, restoration, contestation, and imagination. So thank you for joining us. This talk is actually co-presented by Grunt Gallery, and it is a pre-recording between Whess Harman and Brandi Bird, who worked together on the Together Apart Zine, which is an ongoing project supported by Grunt Gallery, which followed the Together Apart Queer Indigeneities Symposium that was held in spring 2019. And so that has developed into a peer mentorship project consisting of editorial terms headed by emerging queer Indigenous artists and writers interested in self-publishing. So with that, here is Whess and Brandi. Thanks.
Hey Vancouver Book Fair, we are here on behalf of Grunt Gallery. My name is Whess Harman and this is Brandi Bird. First I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We are pre-recording from the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I have a lot of trouble making land acknowledgements at this point because they do sound very stiff and formal, especially the more we repeat them in institutions. But what I can say about the land and that I'm very grateful for, especially with this project, is the relationships that I've built here over the last 10 years as an uninvited guest. This project is very much built out of relationships that have been made through the lit world and through land defense work and through art projects. So I think we're going to introduce ourselves first. I'll let Brandi go first so that we have some back and forth.
Hi, I'm Brandi Bird. I was the Together Apart editor for the issues Water, Home, and Body. And I'm a writer and editor based here in Vancouver. I'm Saulteaux, Cree, and Métis from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I think that's all you need to know about me. To Whess?
So my name is Whess Harman, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself as I tell you about the project. So I work at Grunt Gallery. I'm technically an intern, but we have long decided that 2 years as an intern merits a new title. But I am an artist, and the zine project has been ongoing following the Together Apart Symposium in spring 2019. So the symposium event was put together as a way of showcasing queer Indigenous artists in an event that was for us and designed by us. So the zine project has been ongoing. We received funding to continue into 2 editorial terms. It's basically now broken up into a mentorship where each editor has 3 issues that they're responsible for. And the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in everything, but we are slowly releasing them and finishing this project. So Brandi's just finished their term, and we are moving on to our next editor. So we are here in Massey Books, and we just wanted to film here a little bit because of what an important community space this has been. And Massey, if you don't know, is an Indigenous-run bookstore run by Patricia Massey. Many of our contributors of the zine have books for sale here in the store. It's kind of our first go-to to pick up new books from our friends. Definitely give them a shout out. We're just going to talk a little bit about different things that have come up through here for us. So one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about was Massey Books itself as a community space. And I guess I'll just start with the question, Brandi, like, what is your first experiences in this space?
So I actually came to Massey Books for the first time because I knew they stocked Rihela's Ghost chapbooks, which I have a book with Rihela's Ghost, but at that time they were stocking books by Jessica Johns and Molly Cross Blanchard, who were at that time new friends of mine. And I was so excited to get their work and read their work and just cherish it because it's beautiful. And I found this like beautiful little store in Chinatown that just like cares about Indigenous literature and the Indigenous community and community in general. And I found that really necessary in a city like this.
So I feel like that's sort of one of the special things about this bookstore is like we've built so many relationships through it just in being excited about one another's work, but there's also a lot of community events here, and I think we've both read at Indigenous Brilliance, not at the same night.
No.
But yeah, obviously that event isn't happening right now. I really miss it though.
I miss it too.
Yeah, like there's so many people who I'd only heard of through Indigenous experience because of how they prioritize queer Indigenous folks who are now in the zine. So it's been like a really natural lead-in. It's hard to like talk about community right now in this way that where we have to be so spread apart. Like, do you feel like the zine has done anything? Has it achieved its goal of bringing us together?
I feel like it's achieved the goal of bringing work together that I feel and that the zine feels is really important for others to hear and read, and with like raising really big issues, like for example the water is sacred like sort of theme that has gone through Indigenous communities has left a lot of trans and queer people. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't seen a lot of discourse about that, and so like I really wanted to focus on that in the water issue, and like in the home issue I really wanted to explore what home means for Indigenous people, because that's so fraught, because a lot of us are like displaced from our lands. For like the prairies, for example, is a violent place sometimes, even though it's a lovely place and it's my home. It's just a place that has a lot of bad memories for me and a lot of Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it brought together a lot of work that needs to be together. Mm-hmm. And it's like its own microcosm, its own little community, and I hope that brings joy to other people.
Yeah, I really, really love the home issue. So we're going to be leaving some here at Massey. You'll also be able to get it on the website from Grunt Gallery, Big Cartel. But the other day, one of the things that it was just really, really lovely. Justin Ducharme wrote a piece for this issue and then read it for the Word Festival, and one of the things he was talking about was how writing for this issue was really nice in terms of like in opposition to writing for like bigger magazines like Justin's published in Canadian Art, that writing for this was writing for the community and is for people that he actually gets to have conversations with in person. I think for me that was a really nice moment, because like especially through the production of these zines, like it's been a lot of just us trapped in our rooms. I think this is the second time I've seen you the entire pandemic. But yeah, like I feel I can never like put between like how much I want this to achieve the goal of like bringing us closer together and how much of it is not, like if that's just being idyllic. But hearing Justin say that was really nice.
I feel like it's a magazine for Indigenous people, and like I don't know of many magazines that are just for Indigenous people. There's issues and there's special editors, but this is specifically for, and it's specifically for queer Indigenous people, queer and trans Indigenous people, which is like unheard of.
Yeah, which is not to like discredit the work of like Lindsay Nixon at Canadian Art has been, through their term, they pushed a lot for queer Indigenous folks to have work there, but that's still writing for like the Canada art audience, which is so different from the Indigenous art audience, and then even in that, like again, the microcosm of like queer Indigenous arts. Even though a lot of us, I feel like I have a lot of visibility as a queer Indigenous artist, but then it's hard to really understand that because like we're in this weird echo chamber. And it's not really a bad echo chamber. Like I'm excited about your work, I'm excited about our friends' work. And there's something really nice about being able to work that insular as well.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also like, I found new names that I had never heard of before in the magazine, in editing the magazine, the zine, which was I'm super jazzed about.
Yeah, how did this all happen? So like, I think you wrote something for one of the zines I was editing, and then...
The Indigenous First.
Yes, the Indigenous First. You wrote an essay in that, which was beautiful. And then you were the editor for this last term, and then Kaya Joan DaCosta, who's the next editor, is someone who also submitted to Indigenous First and is now the editor. And they're based out of Toronto, and it's been like this nice progression of like slowly kind of casting out this wider net. And that's sort of, for me, like the beauty of zines is like this really easy distribution. But it's also like there's less pressure, I hope, in putting together a zine versus like writing for Canadian art.
Mm-hmm.
How did that feel for you? Like, working with people who maybe have work in larger publications more? Was there much kind of like translation needed, being like, no, this one's for us?
I actually don't think I had that problem because a lot of people, I think, were itching to write for us, and for queer and trans Indigenous people specifically. My editorial process was pretty hands-off, actually. The majority of it was emailing and keeping people, or not keeping people, but figuring out if people were on track and went out in deadlines and things like that. But otherwise, people's work was just stunning, and I just would read it, and it was perfect almost every time. So, yeah.
Yeah, the quality of work that we've been receiving for this zine is kind of phenomenal, and it kind of makes me think back to I had kind of a period after university where I didn't want to read anything anymore, so it took me quite a while to get back to it, but it kind of gave me this question of like, well, what do I want out of reading? And so when I came back to the bookstore finally to pick a book, I had Leanne Simpson's, one of her books, Islands of Decolonial Love, and so I bought that, and it was like kind of the first time that I really felt like I'd read something in a long time that really spoke to me, because it was so much being written towards the Indigenous community, and like Leanne's work has always had this really good thread of like queerness through it as well. And I get a little bit of that feeling each time we get submissions for the zine, especially like Jay's essay for the last issue for Water. I know a lot of us, we had a lot of trouble being out at the blockades, not just because it was like spending time with the police, but it was also, even within the Indigenous community, there's like so much conversation about like life givers and like what bodies perform what functions in our spaces. And like as this kind of impromptu queer coalition of people, like we just felt so uncomfortable there. So seeing Jay write directly about that, in the last couple of their essays, I think, felt really, like being seen and being able to see one another especially when you don't that often, can feel so powerful. Have you, I don't know, like you're a writer, so,
Okay.
yeah. So like working on projects that speak so directly to like issue-based things, it is really hard. And like one of the projects I'm working on right now is a comic about mental health. And then I've also taken on more work about reconciliation. This time it's a panel discussion. And again, like on this panel, I'm going to be the only Indigenous person, so it's going to be very much like me explaining my experience to people that are never going to inherently understand what that means. And that kind of work is just so draining, and I think a lot of us question, like, what do we even get out of this anymore other than sometimes a paycheck? Like I question a lot in my own work, I think, things about being paid to do like Indigenous type work. But it is like being able to do this work is actually my favorite project, even though it's also been really hard because of the pandemic, because of the protests that are happening in the States around Black Lives Matter. Like there's just so much content, and then this has kind of like been an oasis.
Yeah, I agree. It's been an oasis to me too. It's like having the opportunity to read people's work, and before anybody else has read it, and it's been so inspiring and wonderful. And working with authors to edit their work has been a really big gift to me, because I'm learning how to be an editor too. Like an Indigenous editor, and what that means, and the power that I hold in that position. Even though it's a small project, it's a zine, but it's still really important to me, and it's still really important, I think, to the community that we exist in.
Yeah, I think these small projects, like I always feel, and this is like a personal thing of lacking confidence, I always feel a little bit guilty to pour so much energy into these things, because the problems are so big, you feel like you need to tackle the problem. But out of this project, like we've submitted a proposal for another beautiful collaborative project with different writers and people. So it's like, it's not a static thing, like it's kind of like this leaping off place, but it's also within and of itself this beautiful publication that I hope doesn't feel like it has to be perfect, because I don't. I'm the person running the project, and I'm like, it could be a mess. It's fine.
But I think the imperfections and the things that make it messy are what makes it. This is such a cliche, but are what makes it like really wonderful, because like writing is so often such an intimate and vulnerable and personal thing that for it not to be messy seems really bizarre to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm terrified of having my work edited by people, especially on projects where, whether it's intended, I mean, no, some people do intend to tokenize you, but some people honestly don't. Like they have they have the best intentions going in, and they're not trying to make you feel terribly about anything. But if you're the only Indigenous person on collaborative projects, like sharing your feelings and your writing and your art can be extremely vulnerable. And like, I know I've felt burned by projects that had no intention of trying to harm me. And I just hope that we can be like the space for other queer Indigenous people where they don't have to feel that fear.
And there doesn't have to be like a performativity to it, because it is a smaller publication. And I feel like people can experiment more with their style and their ideas, because it doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. Mm-hmm. It's an idea that is important to the community that we can have a conversation about, mm-hmm. instead of it being prescriptive.
Yeah, and I think even it's like one of the things we talk about a lot in like Indigenous, non-Indigenous audiences is like, sometimes your audience is just going to have to be okay with not knowing something and not having everything explained. And I feel that even in this project working with other Indigenous people, it's like when Quige submitted their poems, I was like, had that moment of like, should we ask for a translation? Should we offer that? And then kind of just had to be like, no, like this doesn't need to be translated. It's not for me. Like Quige is one of the few host nations people we've had in this project. It's a project about home. If it's only going to be decipherable by people from their community, like I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I felt that was probably one of the most powerful things about the issue is the fact that we have untranslated work, because we don't need a translation, like you said. It's not for us. And that there needs to be limits to our consumption too. Like, even as Indigenous people, we're not pan-Indigenous. We're different, and that's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, even in the term like two-spirit, like that's not something that works for all of us. And I think there are like certain factions that really want to push for it as like this is the identity for queer Indigenous people, but like some of us just don't feel comfortable with it, especially like for myself. Like I grew up on my home territory and never heard that term. I haven't heard any other terms for like what I am, but I also know that it probably wasn't two-spirit. And making room for those kind of like rejections is also really important and something you don't get as much opportunity to do within institutions. Which I'm like, you're not graduated?
No, I'm still in my BFA at UBC.
Oh my gosh. Hearing people coming out of writing programs and like the lit world on its own, to me looks like a nightmare.
Yes, it is.
But like I like that I can kind of like come in with projects like these that are much smaller and more community based and not like lit based. I don't know, your world scares me. The amount that writers get paid is not enough. Like,
thank you.
And I hope like with this zine we tried to make sure that we were fairly compensating people for their writing. And I feel like it's still not as much as I would like to pay, but compared to publications that will not be named in this interview, I was really shocked at like how little so many places pay.
Especially since a lot of the work needs to not have been published previously.
Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about Grunt as an institution is like working with them. They're very non-proprietary. Like if this project decides to up and move the gallery, they're okay with that. But that sort of like inclines me to be like, no, I want to stay with you. Really good. I don't think we'd ever say you can't have this published somewhere else, or like, I don't know, maybe I'll get in legal ramification trouble in the future. So we talked a lot about the Together Apart project and what it means to be working on small community-based projects, but I'm really excited to hear about your personal projects.
Well, I'm starting to write a book, a full-length poetry manuscript. It's going to be, I don't know if I'm going to use anything from my chapbook, honestly. It might be starting fresh. I have some poems that I wrote during this pandemic times that really turned into like a suite on the body, and like particularly the unhealthy body. I have chronic illness, and I wanted to explore, or I want to explore what that exactly means, because it's a colonial illness that I have. It's not necessarily one that maybe would have been around, at least in the manifestation that I have it, pre-colonization. So I want to investigate and like interrogate what the hell that means, and deal with like my unhealthy body, and write and think about what that means to be unhealthy in a society that like glamorizes health. but then is still focused on making our bodies as unhealthy as possible. Like we're bombarded by ads and consumerism and the drive to be thin but not too thin, and healthy but not strict about what you eat, and just being like in moderation, but like we don't live in a moderate society at all. So I want to investigate what the hell that means.
Maybe just as a quick question to vent out some of the frustration that we feel. What is your least favorite thing that you ever hear about the queer Indigenous community that's said from outsiders?
That we're resilient. I hate the word resilient. I think we shouldn't have to be resilient, and that it is not necessarily even a good thing. I think that we should be able to be flawed and suffer, and in our own ways with our own method of choice. Like destructive tendencies are looked so down upon, and if you use them then you're not resilient, and like I think that that's a bullshit dichotomy, and it's just something I really hate to be called, or hear other people be called. I know it's empowering for some people, like there's the strong, resilient Indigenous t-shirt I see everywhere, but just for me it's not something that I identify with at all.
Yeah, big time.
What about for you?
Something I really hate being called is being called spiritual, because it's not that I'm not spiritual, it's just like that connotation often comes with like, this was your historical role within your community, and like you have all this honor and you have all this like importance and stuff, whatnot. And like I think a lot about Peter Moore, and I don't even remember the context of this conversation, but he was talking about like mediocre Indians, like Indians who are just like not necessarily good at a lot of things, and like, you know, we're just out there trying to survive, and we're not all like the daughters and sons and whatnots of chiefs and like really important medicine men. Some of us are just like chilling. Like that's kind of how I feel. As much as I would love to be honored, I don't feel like spiritual is really the right route to compliment me. I have a question about writing for you, and I guess I wonder if you have any particular sources of inspiration, and like how you go from there and follow that.
Well, I'm inspired by, it's really corny, but I'm inspired by my community and my ancestors, and how they blend together. Like my queer and trans ancestors, I know they existed. I know that we existed, and I feel like in my work I want to wake them up and call upon them to be in my work, even though my work isn't always like transparently queer or trans. It is about making space for me to express something that maybe we haven't been able to in the past. I often don't wait for inspiration to hit me. Like I try to write as much as possible on a schedule, because otherwise I'll be staring at a blank page forever. But I am inspired by things. I'm inspired by nature. I'm inspired by the land and by other writers. For example, like Lindsay Nixon, Billy Ray Belcourt, Joshua Whitehead, Therese Malhut. I think that's how you say her name. I'm sorry if that's wrong. And so many other writers that I can't even think of right now. A lot of queer writers, a lot of women writers.
I'm really impressed that you're starting like this new huge project, and it's such a big undertaking. And I think one of the main questions that we've all been asking right now is like, how does it feel to be moving forward on projects during a pandemic, during civil unrest, and during like what's a really scary time right now?
It honestly feels really frightening. We're like on the precipice of a climate catastrophe. Well, we're already in a climate catastrophe. I don't really have hope. I was talking with a friend today about hope and how it's more of a coping mechanism than it necessarily is realistic. And especially at the stage we are in, like capitalism and colonialism and racism and all sorts of isms. I don't really have a lot of hope, which makes it hard to write sometimes. It feels like I'm writing into a void, like what will be left of this world in 100, 200, 300 years, which is depressing. And I'm sorry to bring the mood down, but the pandemic has sort of isolated this loneliness I feel like everyone is experiencing, and this lack of hope is really interesting and really isn't being talked about, I think. So maybe I can access that, and if we have a productive conversation about that, we can I don't know, we can't change anything, but we can be with each other. And I think that is what I'm writing to.
It's a really difficult moment to be pulling things together, but I think the conversation that we're having about this project is really optimistic, and like I still, even through digital conversations and stuff like this, like there's so much excitement from people to continue to create and make things, and as hard as it is to create, I don't think I've really had the sense that people want to stop. And like trying to hold on to that one kernel is just so hard, especially when like working in the Canadian context of like granting systems and like projects and like just the many different tiers it takes to get work done. I think the big question I've had is like, how do we work compassionately with each other right now? And I think like this project is a really good example of trying to make space for each other, because it had so many delays. And I wonder how that was for you working with contributors.
Well, it was difficult. 'Cause I wanted to give people as much space as they could have, because I know for myself, it's like I'm in school right now. I'm also working a part-time job where I don't necessarily get that leeway, and I feel like it's bizarre that we don't have that leeway in our everyday life. Like the world is burning. Like people are dying, families are losing loved ones, and it's frightening. It's just frightening right now. And so I feel like if we can make it just a little bit easier for people to create, then that's what we can do. Like that's all we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also balanced against though like this. I think a lot of us, especially marginalized and racialized communities, like we feel like we have to constantly be working to prove our worth. And for a lot of people in the Indigenous community, I just see that struggle right now, and like I feel that struggle. And I'm in an exhibition where one of my friends had to drop out like really close to our deadlines, and I was so worried because it was like it's for a bigger organization, and I thought they were going to be like, you have to give back all the money, and like, or like you have to like finish this and you have to do this because you signed this contract. And I was really pleasantly surprised that instead they were like, we are so sorry that this is happening to you right now. We can work together in the future. This isn't like the end of us wanting to have a relationship with you. Don't worry about the money. If you need extra assistance, like let us know. Like it was just so generous. And it's an Indigenous run organization. So I feel like there is this impulse in community to help each other, which is also coming up with like looking at all the mutual aid GoFundMe's and stuff, which like have this unfortunate thing of like, yeah, capitalism is killing us and we're all dying, but the generosity is a really hopeful thing. And I think I would say generosity and is real and is tangible, and we just need to like to continue to nurture that.
Yeah, I agree. Generosity of time and energy and money.
Yeah.
It's what we need. It's what we need to create. Because without those things, we are focused on how do we just survive. You can't create when you're just focusing on how to survive, or if you do create, it's like, it's beyond me. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I was reading, I feel like so much of like my relationships have just moved on to Twitter. Like we talk on Twitter quite often about Hannibal. And then are you in the Buffy conversation?
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I was reading one of Sam Knox tweets talking about like possibly never having felt like they've been carefree in their work, and like just how that is so unfathomable for so many of us. And it really resonated in kind of like a painful way. But I'm also glad that we're able to talk about it and like name it and be like, yeah, we are struggling for these reasons. It's okay to struggle. It's not going to feel okay to struggle, but we assure like through each other, like we're not going to cut each other out of our lives because we missed the deadline.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I like, even you have been so generous to me in like my missing deadlines and trying to manage other people's deadlines and other people's timelines too, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah. I likewise. I feel dropped the ball a couple of times, but been lucky enough that we all kind of like go scrambling after it, and eventually someone's like, I got it. So yeah, I feel like this is kind of a good spot to end our conversation for this little dude. Thank you so much for being a part of this. It's really good to see you in person.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's amazing to see you in person.
I still look gorgeous. No, it's good to see you on Twitter, but it is definitely better to see you in person.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Please go and support the Together Apart Zine. You can find issues over at Whess Harman's table at the Vancouver Art Book Fair website. And our next program will begin at 1 with Ken Lum and Kim Wynn. So see you then. Thank you.